Hi, and thanks so much for inviting me to be a part of the meeting today. I want to tell you a few stories, but first, sort of as a panelist, I kind of want to do a job of maybe abstracting up a little. Because at its core, reuse of data is really use other than those which were originally intended by people other than those who collected the data. And there's a lot rolled into there. There's a lot rolled into there about knowledge coming along with the data, as Dr. Axton referred to earlier. And, you know, if you buy from the information quality industry and sector that data and information are an asset, then we would need to start thinking about that asset as something that might outlive us. Maybe in the terms of our lives, maybe some data that old aren't useful, but I think we've all experienced the departure of an important individual at a company and not been able to answer critical questions about the data. And what I really want to emphasize throughout the discussion, sort of like the Lorax who speaks for the trees, is I'm here to speak for the semantics. Because if the data aren't specifically defined well enough that others can use them who weren't involved in the original collection, then we as researchers really haven't done our jobs well. And that may be a little harsh, but there's also a recognition, I think, in the room that getting to that level of specificity requires standards that don't exist, and it also requires a level of rigor from the researcher, both at the trial or the study level, as well as at the individual data element level, to include the semantic specificity that's necessary for humans to align the concepts according to notion of human meaning, and also maybe for analytic tools that may automate or speed the review process to align those concepts according to notions of human meaning. And so now I'm going to tell you a story. You know, I had the great fortune to work with the Clinical Trials Network from NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse Treatment. And in 2006, around that time, NIDA put up the first standards-based public data share. And NIDA did an incredibly brave thing. Those heroes actually supported the de-identification of the data and the aligning of the data according to the CDISC SDTM standard and putting that data on the web where it's publicly available, of course with requests to use the data and important infrastructure like that. But I also want to sort of sing the praises of the heroes and use this as an example at NIDA, who years before the data share went available, and it's up on ctndatashare.org if anybody is interested. Years before that, there was a committee of investigators and research teams from the Clinical Trials Network who actually defined the concepts for the individual trials. Not just a common battery of assessment, which by the way makes the data set of 27 trials even more valuable, but defining the other data elements that weren't standardized in validated instruments or tools. And because those individuals had done that and had implemented that uniformly across the network, it was relatively easy to be able to find a uniform and a consistent mapping into the CDISC SDTM, which some people may call it a content standard. I tend to call it more of a format standard if you leave out the CDISC terminology part. But we were able to put those concepts all into similar buckets so that people who use the data could set the data sets on top of each other as they would want to do a pooled analysis, or as an FDA reviewer might want to do to look for class effects across compounds. So that's one story from 2006. And then I'm going to fast forward. We've recently completed the initial year of the schizophrenia data standards work under one of the FDA R24s, and I'd like to thank the two members of the Clinical Expert Review Committee who've mentioned that work today. They've actually been doing the very detailed and difficult work of taking a set of data elements that have been harmonized from phase 3 pivotal trial case report forms submitted with a schizophrenia indication into a set of common data elements. And so those went out to the Clinical Expert Review Committee. They're out twice. They're now out. They have the HL7 ballot for the standard data elements. The first ballot's closed. We intend to ballot again. one ballot cycle is pretty close for the clinical professional societies to convene a working group. I think 1 out of 5 actually got it to us within the 1-month ballot cycle, and those are also heroes who were able to do that. But what I want to tell you about the schizophrenia data standards effort is, I've been involved in about 10 therapeutic area data element standards projects at this point in my career. And when we went into schizophrenia, I hadn't ever synthesized them from case report forms before. I'd always worked directly with clinical expert committees in order to define the content. And when we did that, I was just about certain that I was going to see an asymptotic effect, that each trial that we abstracted data elements off the case report forms and synthesized them together, that each one would provide fewer and fewer and fewer new instances of new semantic content or new data elements. That is indeed not what we found. And Dr. Fitzmartin earlier mentioned the FDA's pain and the plight of the FDA reviewer that has to look at data across compounds or that's taping the stuff up to the wall. I now understand what those people have to go through in order to look at the data. Not only that, in the event when there are post-marketing safety issues that arise, in order to combine the data from the trials. Because given some of the different operationalizations of important variables that we found, important variables, things like variables that were used to define an episode of disease, very critical variables, were operationalized completely different by different sponsors. And it's not until we start attacking things at the definition level, at the clinical definition level, that we're going to be able to support that compiling and that reuse of data, whether it's reuse from healthcare to research or reuse within a trial, sending data around and integrating it more easily, reuse in regulatory decision making, or secondary data analysis by other researchers. It all depends on really the data element as the atomic level of information exchange. An approach that's used in virtually every other industry aside from ours. And so I want to close by saying that, and sort of emphasizing that in this process, what's really important and key is not necessarily the synthesis work, which is difficult and it does take time, but having authoritative clinical definitions. Because we won't ever truly impact the burden on clinical investigational sites until we're able to facilitate using data that are collected in care. It's when we can provide a concept unique identifier as a string that can pull that data element through from an electronic health record system all the way to a clinical research system that we're going to be able to affect the burden on the clinical investigational sites. And I'm under no, delusions, speaking of schizophrenia, that we'll be able to do that with all of the data or even with half of the data. But when we can, I think it's critical to do that. The last thing I want to remark about is the discussion earlier that basically data standards don't equal data quality. And I'd like to offer a way of thinking about data and information quality from the information quality community. And they conceptualize data and information quality as a multidimensional concept. And so accuracy might be one dimension that it's important for us to measure, monitor, and control. So also maybe timeliness or completeness. So also maybe specificity and data definition. With that, I thank you.